And for my Omni presentation, I will be doing it on extracurricular activities and GPA for my Statistics 103 class. So the outline for my presentation is I will be talking about the introduction and motivation, literature review, research questions, data collection, data analysis, results, and my conclusion. So ever since high school, I've always been involved in extracurricular activities and have been told that students who are in clubs are more successful. I wanted to see if that case was true in college, therefore I decided to do my statistics research paper on extracurricular activities and GPA. I decided to research extracurricular activities and GPA because I am also involved in a couple of clubs on campus. I noticed that many of these students were very bright and had high GPAs. I also noticed that sometimes having a lot of responsibility, especially having leadership in these clubs, could affect schoolwork. I wanted to see if there was a positive correlation between extracurricular activities and GPA. For my literature review, I found 3 sources, and the first source was extracurricular activities and their effect on students' grade point average. In this study, they determined that there was a positive correlation between extracurricular activities and grade point average. So students at the university who were involved in clubs, they had a higher GPA. And for the second one, students who participate in extracurricular activities get better grades. And the third source, students achieve much higher rates of graduation. They maintain better grade weighted averages and had higher good standing rates when they engage in extracurricular activities. And so far, no one has looked at the effect of extracurricular activities on GPA at Maricosta, and it is of utmost importance that we study such relationships. So I came up with 3 research questions. My first research question was, is there any correlation between age and participation in extracurricular activities? My second question is there any correlation between gender and participation in extracurricular activities? And my last question is, are students who participate in extracurricular activities more successful in school than those who aren't involved in any clubs? For my data collection, I collected the data using Google Forms with the help of my professor. We made a questionnaire on Google Docs, and I asked about 8 questions, and some of these questions were, what is your age, what is your gender, your GPA, do you work, and I was able to post it on social media, and I got a few responses. And then I asked my professor if he could post it on Canvas, and that's when I started getting more responses. So I used Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat, and I got a total of 90 responses. And this took me about 4 to 5 weeks to collect the data, and then I had to interpret it. So before I get started, I wanted to define some things. So for the null hypothesis, is the hypothesis that there is no significant difference between specified populations, any observed difference being due to sampling or experimental error. Alternative hypothesis is used in hypothesis testing that is contrary to the null hypothesis. And the chi-square test, which I used, is relating to or denoting a statistical method assessing the goodness of fit between observed values and those expected theoretically. The p-value is, in statistical hypothesis testing, the p-value or probability value is the probability of obtaining test results at least as extreme as the results actually observed during the test, assuming that the null hypothesis is correct. For my data analysis, I was able to clean and organize it on Google Sheets, and I was able to organize it based on gender, age, extracurricular activities, and grade point average. And I conducted a 3 chi-square test for all my research questions, and the null or alternative hypotheses are as follows. So for my first research question, my null hypothesis is the age and extracurricular activities are independent, and my alternative hypothesis is that age and extracurricular activities are dependent. And for my research question 2, my null hypothesis is that the explanatory and response variables are independent, and for my alternative hypothesis is that the explanatory and response variables are dependent. And for my research question 3, my null hypothesis is that the distribution of the population proportions for a categorical variable is the same in all populations of interest. And my alternative hypothesis is the distribution of the population proportions for a categorical value of interest is not the same for all populations of interest. So these are my results. For table 1, this is observations of age and extracurricular activities. So I was able to put the two variables, and so anyone who was 21 and younger and anyone who was 22 and over, and if they were in a club and if they were not in a club, and I got 87 responses. And as you can see, it's like about pretty much the same. For table 2, the expected frequency when two variables are independent. And so once I got my observed and expected frequency tables, I was able to put that into the calculator, and I got my chi-square and my p-value. And my chi-square, I got a 1.9, and then for my p-value, I got a 0.15. And so the level of significance is a 0.5, and so my p-value is a 0.15, which is greater than a 0.05. So that means that we failed to reject the null hypothesis, and we reject the alternative hypothesis. So the age and club membership are independent and are not related. For my table 3, this was for my research question 2. It was the observed frequency for gender and club membership, and so I put this female and male, and if they were in a club or not, and you can also tell that it's pretty much the same, about the same. And then I created the expected frequency table when the two variables are independent, and I also was able to put this into the calculator and calculate the goodness of fit test. And so this gave me my chi-square and my p-value, and for my chi-square I got a 0.3, and the p-value I got a 0.5, and so we used the same level of significance, 0.5, and my p-value was 0.569, which is greater than 0.05, so therefore we failed to reject the null hypothesis because it is not statistically significant, and the explanatory and response variables are independent. So meaning that the gender and being in a club are independent. For my research question 3, I used the chi-square test for homogeneity in two-way tables. So I was able to break this down into 3 categories. So anyone who had a 0 to a 3.0, and from a 3.1 to a 3.9, and anywhere from a 4.0 plus. And I also wanted to point out that they are pretty similar as well, and I got 87 responses. Then I created the expected frequency table for club work and GPA, and I was able to put this into the calculator and calculate my chi-square and my p-value. And for my chi-square, I got a 0.205, and for my p-value, I got a 0.65. And so we're also using the same level of significance of 5% of 0.05. And so my p-value is 0.6507, which is greater than 0.05. So that means that we failed to reject the null hypothesis and we reject the alternative hypothesis. So this means the distribution of the population proportions for club work and GPA is the same in all populations of interest. So regardless if you are in a club or if you're not, your GPA, it doesn't affect your GPA. So in conclusion, for my research question 1, I found that there seems to be convincing evidence that there is no relationship between age and club membership. For my research question 2 of gender and participation in extracurricular activities, I found that there is convincing evidence that there is no relationship between gender and club membership. And for my last research question is that there is no difference between students who are involved in extracurricular activities and those who aren't and their GPA. So there are a couple of limitations to my study. One of these would include that I posted this survey on social media and therefore incurred voluntary response bias. The participants chose whether to respond to my survey or not, maybe for their own convenience. So another limitation to my research is that my sample size was just 90 students. I think in order to be more certain whether there is correlation, I would need to collect about 300 or more samples. And if I were to repeat this survey, and I would want to get about like a thousand samples for the results to be more accurate. And another thing I would have done differently is to have defined extracurricular activities, because that could mean a lot of things for different people, such as sports and volunteering, and I wanted to focus mainly on club work. So some of the implications of my study. So the myth that students involved in extracurricular activities have higher GPAs might be wrong. However, correlation does not mean causation. There's convincing evidence based on my research that there seems to be no difference between students' grade point averages that are involved in extracurricular activities and those who aren't. Thank you.